my God, I am so excited to be talking about negative gearing again. Is that sarcasm? I don't know. To catch you up, I'll quickly give you some exposition. So in 2001, the average price of a house cost Australians 4.6 times the median income. In 2020, that cost jumped to 6.5 times. And in 2024, at the end of 2024, it was around 8.6. In the past 5 years, the cost of a median home increased by $230,000. There's a lot of factors that impact the housing market and housing affordability. You've probably heard a lot of debates around the causes like housing supply, construction, red tape, zoning regulation, immigration, foreign students. But amongst it all, the one that the politicians fear talking about the most is negative gearing and the capital gains tax discount. Now, this isn't to say that those things don't contribute one way or another to unaffordability, but I'm specifically talking about these two things because I think they're unfair, and I think that they incentivize the housing industry to be an investor's market, driving the cost well beyond reasonable values. Okay, quick refresher for what these things do and how they function. We'll start with negative gearing. When someone buys an investment property and they rent it out for less than what it costs them to pay off the mortgage and all that, they're incurring a loss. As an example, Peter buys an investment property and the mortgage repayments cost him $1,200 a month. Peter decides to rent out that property for $1,000 a month, meaning that Peter is still out of pocket or making a loss of $200 a month or $2,400 a year. Now, we could argue that long term, they're actually paying off this thing, they're going to own it, they can sell it off, and they can make a profit. So they're not actually incurring a loss. And I would agree with you, and this is going to be relevant later as well, but for tax purposes, year to year, they're incurring a loss. Negative gearing is the ability to deduct those losses from whatever tax they would be expected to pay on any forms of usual income. So Peter earns $5,000 a month at his job. This is the other external form of income. That means he would be earning $60,000 a year and be expected to pay 30% of that to taxes. But because he is making a loss of $2,400 on his investment property, he can deduct the taxes he has to pay on his main income, $60,000, by $2,400. So he only has to pay tax on $57,600. This reduces the amount of tax Peter has to pay by $720 a year. This becomes a lucrative venture, but even more so for people in higher tax brackets, not only because they have the money to be able to afford an investment property, but because they're paying a greater proportion of tax on that external income, meaning that there's more tax for them to offset when they can negatively gear a property. Now, the real kicker comes when you have a look at the capital gains tax discount. The capital gains tax is a tax that you pay on the profits that you make from selling an asset. It doesn't specifically have to be housing, but for the purposes of this video, we're talking about housing. So it's important to know that you don't pay tax if you sell your primary residence. You don't pay a capital gains tax on that. It's only for investment properties, and you have to have owned the house for a minimum of 12 months. But some mad DJ changed the rules in 1999 to discount the amount of tax that you have to pay by 50%. So, assuming housing is increasing in value, and I think we've established that it is, if you purchase an investment property and you scoop up all the negative gearing deductions over the course of a year or a few years or whatever, and the housing bubble is increasing and the value of your house is going up and up and up and up and up, after 3 years, you decide to sell your property and you sell it for $300,000 more than you bought it for, you only have to pay tax on $150,000 of that. And when regular Australians want to purchase their first home, not only are they facing a housing price that's 8.6 times the median household income, but now they have to compete with property investors who arguably have greater access to loans and money and can super easily outbid them for these properties. Now, negative gearing and a capital gains tax discount aren't a new topic of debate in politics. Back in 1985, the Hawke Labor government actually tried to heavily regulate negative gearing. They confined what tax could be offset strictly to that made from that investment property through like rent or whatever. So investors couldn't offset their external income. But they brought it back 2 years later after people started to have a little bit of a panic, saying it was increasing rental prices. Now, if that were true and it were the result of negative gearing being scrapped, you would expect to see that across the board. But the increases in rental prices were confined to Sydney and Perth. And actually, there was a decline in rental prices in Adelaide and Brisbane, and Melbourne stayed relatively the same. Some economists have gone on to state that the rises seen in Sydney and Perth at the time weren't actually related to negative gearing at all, but other factors. It was even chalked up to the general expected fluctuation and interaction between vacancy rates and rental costs. In general supply and demand terms, if you have a surplus of something, you get competitive reduced prices. But if there's few of something, people know that they can charge more for that thing. And during this specific period, Sydney's vacancy rate was at 1%, Perth was at 1.4. For reference, the current vacancy rates in all the cities are, wait, holy shit, 1.6% Sydney, 1.8% Melbourne. But we have negative gearing, guys. This should mean we have a high vacancy rate. What the hell? What the hell?
If we stop negative gearing, we will drive up the cost of rent.
Apparently a healthy vacancy rate is meant to be 3%. Less than that, you have undersupply. More than that, you have oversupply. Okay, so the 80s wasn't the only time that we ever spoke about negative gearing. In 2016 and 2019, the Shorten Labor Party went to both elections with the idea of scrapping negative gearing as one of their policies amongst 250 other cost of policies. Labor lost both of those elections fairly miserably. Now, since then, there's been some debate about whether or not negative gearing was what cost Labor that election. Now, I, for one, am fairly convinced that scrapping negative gearing as a policy was not what cost them those elections. Labor themselves have a whole post-election report that you can read that expresses the exact same sentiment. Something that plagued specifically the 2019 elections were their death taxes scary stories. Now, I actually didn't know this until recently, but did you know that death taxes conspiracy didn't even stem from any of Labor's proposed policies at all? At all? It started on some talk show of some guy hypothesizing, being like...
Well, moving on, there are reports unions want a Labor government to introduce a death tax.
And all these people, all these pundits just started talking about like some hypothetical. It kind of just took off. I don't know if you remember seeing the posters and stuff around that time. I wasn't very tuned into politics back then, but it's generally like the only thing I can remember. That and Bill Shorten being the most like uncharismatic goof I think I'd ever seen.
What's your favourite type of letters?
Cut to the 2025 election. The only thing we hear about negative gearing from any of the politicians was Mark Riley proposing some kind of hypothetical query to Peter Dutton about negative gearing during one of those mind-numbing political debate things.
I want you to say tonight, categorically, negative gearing is off the table.
Yeah, it's off the table. And
Do you believe it?
No, I don't.
But of course, journalists, economists, pundits, and the general population were talking about it and begging for something to be done. Now we're post-election and we've just kicked off the new 3-year term for Labor. They've just won an eye-watering majority in the lower house and they've got a strong seats in the upper house. But the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, is convening the Productivity and Economic Roundtable in August, where he's accepting any and all major tax changes proposals for consideration. And now we've seen Sally McManus, she's the ACTU secretary. She did the thing on Insiders where she fairly bluntly said
negative gearing and capital gains tax should be reformed.
She's a fairly bigwig in the political sphere, you know, boss of the union, expressing sincere concern about the housing crisis and putting the pressure on Labor to actually do something about it. But a lot of what needs to be done is building up our expectation for change. It's all well and good to say things like people who negatively geared their properties actually voted for abolishing negative gearing back in 2019, and housing affordability is a real problem that's only getting more and more exacerbated as the years go on. I believe the culture for this specific change to be made is that people need to understand what these things are, how they function, and why abolishing them or regulating them is truly going to be our best chance at doing something about the housing crisis. Gen Z and millennials make up a greater voting base than the boomers. We've all heard that tagline back in May. But this voting pool is only going to grow over time. And if Labor are going to be the party to do something about this, they need to have the consensus of people agreeing that this is what they want to be done. If you were to have asked me what I felt about this like 2 months ago, I would have been completely black-pilled. But seeing Jim Chalmers doing his speech and Sally McManus talking on Insiders and all of the headlines about negative gearing and stuff popping up, it's like completely de-radicalized me. It's given me hope to think that the people in charge actually do care about doing something about this, and that they want to shift the conversation and culture towards change for housing affordability. I hope, maybe, that after you watch this video, you might feel the same. Maybe you already knew all this and maybe you didn't, but the most important thing is to expect more and let them know that you want housing reform and let them know that this is what you want to be done in order to get housing reform. If we're lucky, we could see it be done in this term, but what I expect is, as long as the public consensus is there, that Labor can build up and run their next election with negative gearing and a capital gains tax discount as one of their policies. As they say, if you get the mandate, you get the